On a bright August morning, as the first rays of sunlight lit up the peaceful downtown playground, Colonel Michelle Carter felt a rare moment of calm. After decades of intense military service, with countless stressful missions behind her, she had finally taken a break. She decided to spend the weekend enjoying time with her nephew, Jeremy, at the playground. It was a day when she didn't need to wear her uniform, didn't have to answer emergency calls, or think about the demands of her military career. She could simply relax and cherish the moments with the child she loved so dearly. Dressed in a casual tracksuit and sporting her short black hair, Michelle blended in with the crowd, unnoticed by most. She sat on a nearby bench, watching as Jeremy, full of energy and excitement, played with the other kids. The 6-year-old, a cheerful boy with a constant smile, was working his way up a climbing structure, challenging himself. Michelle couldn't help but smile at his eagerness and energy, hoping he would grow up with the same carefree spirit, free from the burdens she had carried throughout her life. The playground was buzzing with children's laughter as they ran, swung, and climbed. The cheerful music from the outdoor speakers mixed with the sounds of joy, creating a happy atmosphere. Michelle felt at peace. This was a rare moment where she could forget about the world outside and simply enjoy the simple pleasures of life. But as she sat there lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice a figure approaching her from behind. It was a middle-aged man in a police uniform, his chest displaying the insignia of the local police department. His name was Jack, a veteran police officer. He had worked in the area for years. He had always been vigilant during his patrols, ever watchful of any potential dangers. However, Jack had a hidden prejudice against people of color, a bias that he rarely let show. Despite the area being known for its safety, it had once been the site of an unsolved child abduction, a case that still haunted him. This past event had left him wary of anyone he considered an outsider, especially people he felt might be a threat. As Jack observed Michelle from a distance, his gaze lingered on her, uncertain, before he decided to approach her. As Jack stood in front of Michelle, a feeling of suspicion lingered in his mind. While there were many women in the area, something about Michelle, her calm demeanor, and the sight of a woman of color, alone while children played, reminded him of past unpleasant incidents. These thoughts had slowly built up over the years, fueled by biases he hadn't questioned. He felt the need to check on her, as if his instincts were telling him something was off. Jack halted directly in front of Michelle, his posture rigid, his eyes filled with suspicion. He stood still for a moment, observing her silently before he finally spoke, his tone rough. "Do you have any identification?" Michelle looked up, not surprised by the presence of a police officer. Throughout her life, she had been accustomed to such encounters, especially with her background. However, the officer's attitude was different, rude and dismissive, which caught her off guard. "Excuse me, could you tell me why I need to show my papers?" Michelle replied, her voice calm but firm. She had no intention of creating a scene, but she also wasn't about to tolerate disrespect. Jack, clearly displeased by her question, frowned and responded, "You know there was a child kidnapping here. I'm just doing my job to make sure everything is safe. If you don't cooperate, I'll have to ask you to leave immediately." The insinuation that she might be a threat struck a nerve. Michelle felt a surge of anger rise inside her. The thought that he might consider her a child abductor was both absurd and deeply insulting. A highly trained military officer who had spent decades serving her country, following every rule and regulation, now found herself in a situation that defied reason. "I have nothing more to say, sir," Michelle replied, her tone now tight with tension. "I'm just a mother, a grandmother, and I'm here with my grandson. If you continue like this, I'm going to call your agency." But Jack didn't back off. He muttered something under his breath and insisted she provide her papers. Michelle realized at that moment that the situation was escalating. Despite her warnings, Jack's attitude hadn't changed, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about safety. It was about something deeper. Discrimination, disrespect, a clear bias she wasn't going to ignore. Looking him squarely in the eye, she said with unwavering confidence, "I am a military officer. I don't need to prove it to you. But if you continue like this, I won't hesitate to report the matter." Jack, however, did not believe her. His eyes showed disbelief, and he stood there, unmoving, as though her words meant nothing to him. Jack continued to stand before Michelle, adding insults, as if dismissing her military rank and assuming she was just trying to show off or get out of the situation. Michelle sat still, her eyes glowing with a calm strength that spoke volumes. She had faced far more dangerous situations before, on battlefields engulfed in smoke, intense diplomatic negotiations, but the rudeness and prejudice she was facing now felt different. This wasn't just disrespect, it was personal. She was being belittled because of the color of her skin, something she had spent her entire life fighting to overcome. Jack, still standing there, with his hand on his gun belt, adopted a threatening pose. The parents on the playground were starting to notice the interaction, some casting curious glances, while others whispered among themselves. Michelle could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She remained calm and composed. "I won't." "Ask again!" Jack's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Show me your papers right now, or I'll have you arrested for failing to cooperate with the police." Michelle took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She didn't want to escalate the situation, but Jack's actions had crossed a line. She stood up, her eyes locked on his with unwavering determination. "Officer, I've made it very clear," she replied, her voice cold but steady. "I have done nothing wrong, and you have no right to demand my papers without a valid reason. If you continue to harass me, I will ask your superiors to deal with this matter." Jack, however, didn't back down. In fact, her firm stance only seemed to irritate him more. He was used to people submitting to his authority, unwilling to challenge him. The fact that a woman of color had dared to stand up and question him only fueled his frustration. "Some important person," Jack mocked, a laugh escaping his lips. "Who do you think you are?" His words were laced with hidden meanings, and Michelle felt the sting in each one. But instead of responding with anger, she simply smiled faintly, a smile that unsettled Jack. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Michelle asked, her voice still calm. "I am Colonel Michelle Carter, a United States Army officer." Michelle stood her ground, her calm demeanor unwavering despite the escalating situation. Jack, clearly not convinced by her statement, mocked her, laughing at her claim. "Colonel, don't make me laugh. In that old sweatsuit, calling yourself a colonel. That's ridiculous." The words were like fuel to the fire. Michelle clenched her fists but refused to let her composure slip. She had faced similar situations before, people looking down on her because of her skin color, her gender, or because they believed she didn't deserve the respect she had earned. But this time, she wasn't going to let it slide. "You may not believe it, but the truth is the truth," Michelle said, her voice firm. "You're overstepping your bounds, and I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." Jack took another step forward, now only inches away from her, his gaze locked on hers in a challenge. Then, as if to assert his authority, he placed his hand on his gun, drawing it out and pointing it at Michelle. "You think you can scare me?" Jack roared. "Show me your papers or I will arrest you." The sound of Jack's yell seemed to stop everything around them. The children playing in the park froze in place, some running to their parents, while others watched in confusion. Several parents, alarmed by the sight of the gun, backed away. Some of them pulled out their phones to record the encounter. Michelle, however, remained still, her eyes like cold steel. "Do you really want to do this?" she asked, her voice unwavering. "You want to point a gun at an army colonel in front of a crowd?" Jack ignored her warning, standing firm with the gun shaking slightly in his hand. His eyes, though, were filled with stubbornness. "I don't care who you are," he said. "I'm just doing my job." Michelle knew the situation had become dangerously out of control. Calmly, she reached for her phone, keeping her gaze fixed on Jack the entire time. "If you don't stop, I'm calling the mayor," she said, her voice steady, "and I'll make sure you're held accountable." Jack smirked, trying to act unfazed. But inside, a hint of nervousness began to grow. The crowd's eyes were on him, and he didn't want to appear weak. "Call," he sneered. "See who comes to rescue. You!" Without hesitation, Michelle dialed the mayor's number and placed the phone to her ear. Within seconds, a familiar voice answered. "Mayor Wilson here." "Mayor, this is Colonel Michelle Carter," Michelle responded, her voice calm but authoritative. "I'm at the city park, and I'm being held at gunpoint by a police officer who is demanding my identification without just cause." There was a brief moment of silence on the other end. Then the mayor's voice turned serious. "Michelle, I'll be there soon. Stay there and don't do anything dangerous." Michelle nodded, her eyes never leaving Jack. "Thank you, sir." As Michelle stood calmly, Jack began to feel uneasy. He still didn't know who she truly was, but her confident demeanor and the phone call she had made only moments ago made him increasingly uncomfortable. However, instead of stopping, he grew more stubborn. "You think one phone call will change anything?" Jack scoffed, but Michelle could see the uncertainty growing in his eyes. Michelle remained still, unshaken. She knew that justice would eventually come, and people like Jack would be held accountable for their actions. Less than 10 minutes after Michelle's call, the tense atmosphere around the playground was broken by the sound of a car horn in the distance. A luxury car, accompanied by 2 police vehicles, rushed into the park. The crowd erupted into murmurs, their eyes fixated on the arriving vehicles. The mayor's car screeched to a halt, and Mayor Wilson, a white man in his 50s known for his tough and fair demeanor, stepped out. He scanned the area before his gaze landed on Michelle and Jack. With brisk steps and a cold expression, he approached. "What's going on here?" Mayor Wilson demanded, his voice filled with authority. Jack quickly turned his head, concern flickering in his eyes before it was masked by a facade of arrogance. He raised his hand in a military salute. "Mr. Mayor, I am on duty to protect this area. This woman refused to produce her papers when I asked for them. I suspect she is involved in illegal activities." Mayor Wilson narrowed his eyes at Jack before turning to Michelle. "Colonel Carter, are you okay?" Jack froze. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Colonel?" he stammered. "Did you say she was a colonel?" Michelle didn't immediately respond. Slowly, she pulled out her military identification card from her pocket and handed it to Mayor Wilson. He inspected it carefully, then held it up for Jack to see. "That's right," the mayor said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "This is Colonel Michelle Carter, one of our most decorated military officers. She has served this country for over 2 decades, and you just pointed a gun at her." Jack's face turned pale, his body stiffening, as if he had been punched in the chest. I don't know," Jack stammered. "I was just doing my job. I didn't mean to." Michelle stepped forward, her eyes burning with anger. "Not intentional," she said, her voice cold. "You insulted me, made racist remarks, and threatened me with a gun in front of children." As Jack stood there, Michelle's words rang in his ears. And parents, is that what a public defender does? The crowd around them grew, with many people still filming on their phones. Michelle knew the incident was spreading fast, and soon the images of a police officer pointing a gun at an innocent woman would flood social media. Mayor Wilson took a deep breath, then turned back to Jack. "Mr. Jack, I've received many complaints about your work ethic in the past, but I've always believed people deserve a chance to make amends. However, today you crossed the line, sir. I'm just doing my job." Jack tried to defend himself, his voice faltering. "There have been kidnappings in this area before, and I'm just trying to prevent more." The mayor raised his hand, cutting him off. "The kidnapping has nothing to do with insulting and threatening a citizen. Your actions were not only wrong, but dangerous. As mayor, I cannot tolerate this behavior." Jack stood still, his initial stubbornness fading completely. He knew he had no way out. His defense was hollow, and now he had to face the consequences. Within 30 minutes, an emergency meeting was convened at the scene. Representatives from the police department arrived, having been notified about the situation. Michelle stood beside Mayor Wilson, calmly answering questions and recounting the entire incident in detail. The police representative, a stern-looking middle-aged white woman, listened without interrupting. When she was done, she turned to Jack, with a cold gaze. "Mr. Jack, you are hereby suspended from duty immediately," she announced. "You will be subject to an internal investigation. If these allegations are confirmed, not only will you lose your job, but you will also face serious legal consequences." Jack lowered his head, speechless. His fellow officers arrived and handcuffed him in front of the crowd. Some in the crowd applauded, while others sighed in relief. Michelle stood still, watching as Jack was taken away. She felt a sense of relief that justice had been served, but at the same time, a deep sadness washed over her. Actions like Jack's not only hurt her, but also eroded people's faith in the legal system. Later that day, Michelle and Mayor Wilson sat together on a park bench, reflecting on what had just occurred. The children were back to playing, and the tension had dissipated. Michelle sat beside Mayor Wilson as the sounds of laughter filled the air. The mayor spoke first, his tone sincere. "I apologize for what happened," he said. "I can't change what he did, but I promise to do everything in my power to prevent similar incidents in the future." Michelle nodded, appreciating his words. "Thank you, sir. I hope this incident serves as a lesson, not just to Jack, but to everyone who thinks that power can be used to oppress others." The mayor smiled, though his eyes were still filled with concern. "We have a long way to go, Michelle, but with people like you, I believe we can make a difference." Michelle looked over at her grandson, laughing with the other children. She knew the fight against prejudice and discrimination wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she was not alone. Today was just one step in a long journey. She stood up, dusted off her clothes, and smiled at the mayor. "We will fight one day at a time," she said, "and I won't stop." With that, she walked over to her nephew, taking his hand. "Let's go home, little soldier," she said with a smile. "I still have a lot to tell you about justice and courage."